Well, a few months back, I was at my sister's wedding. Actually, I had the chance to officiate my sister's wedding up in Pennsylvania. It was a really special day for me. Kind of cool as a pastor, but really special as a brother. Getting to celebrate with her and my family, my new brother-in-law, Josh. It was really cool. At the reception afterwards, I found myself at a table with a guy in a kind of a similar season of life as me. Middle-aged guy, married, young kids at home. We struck up a conversation with each other. So in a setting like this, talking with someone I've just met, and they know I'm a pastor, they know I'm a man of faith, and he hasn't changed tables, right? Sometimes that happens, right? He's not avoiding eye contact. He actually wants to have a conversation with me, and I really appreciated that. That was really good. And so in a setting like that, there's a question I always love to ask. It's, what's your church background been like? You know, what's your experience with Christians been like in your life? And this guy told his story to me, at least a piece of his story to me. He was really gracious. He answered my question. And as he started to explain some of his story, I remember thinking, man, this sounds so familiar. I have heard this story before. At least I've heard a version of this story so many times as a pastor. In fact, it might have some similarities with your story. But he told me that growing up, man, faith was everything. Church was a huge part of his life growing up. And then he became a teenager, and as a teenager, he started to have a lot of questions. Started to read the Bible on his own. He had a lot of questions about what Scripture was teaching. He had a lot of questions about God. He had a lot of questions about himself. And he described these questions kind of all coming together. He said it was almost like they were this tangled knot, this big ball of really good, really tough questions that was just locked right there inside his heart. And he didn't know what to do with it as a teenager. And so what he tried to do with it was he tried to take it to his church community. He actually took it to an authority figure in his church family. And in his words, this authority figure he took his really good questions to refused to take his questions seriously. And so he said, well, that's it for me then. If you're not going to take my good questions seriously, I'm not going to take your God seriously. And so in that moment, he said, that day, he said, I walked away. I was done with God. I was done with church. I was done with faith. And I remember hearing that story and I thought, what a tragedy. Like, what a shame. Like, what a missed opportunity for that church community, for that authority figure in the church, for that guy in that one moment to walk away because his questions weren't taken seriously. And that really weighed on me because the more I thought about it, I've heard so many people with stories just like that. You might have a story just like that. Somehow, some way, you've kind of found your way back to church here this morning. If that's the case, man, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. I want to start this message in kind of an unconventional way. I want to just talk to people who call Seven Marks Church our home. Guests, I'm so glad you're here. You can listen in, but this is just for who we are as a church family here. Hey, church family, Seven Marks, can we just commit that we are going to be a community that takes people's good questions seriously? Can we commit to that? Can we say that is what we are going to be known for as a church? Look, we aren't perfect. We don't have all these things figured out. We don't need to pretend to be perfect, but we can be a place that is wholeheartedly committed to treating people with respect and dignity, even in their questions, especially in their questions, and taking those questions seriously. We have got to be a place where people can wrestle with the hard stuff of life. Now, that's a big commitment because questions aren't always easy, right? There's some really tough questions out there. You talk to people and they're going through some really difficult things and the answers aren't always easy. But also for you, when you're here, and maybe you're in that boat, maybe you do have some really good, really tough questions that you're wrestling with right now. You need to know on the front end, you might not like the answers that the Bible has to your really good and tough questions. But regardless of the challenges, regardless of the difficulties, we have to unashamedly, fearlessly be committed as a church community to be a place where we can wrestle with tough questions. Do you guys know why? Here's my thought. Because life is way too short and the gospel is way too important for us to call people to simply play along with some dumb religious game, to just go through the motions. If God is who he says he is, he can handle your questions. Do you know that? It's actually more than that, though. If God is who he says he is, he can do more than just handle your questions. He can use your questions. In fact, God delights, guys, he delights in taking our good, our challenging, our tough questions and the things we're wrestling with to move in our lives, to shape us, to grow us in faith, hope, and love, to build us up in maturity. Wrestling with tough questions is an essential part of maturing in your faith. We are so often intimidated by it. If you told me you wanted to get physically stronger, I want to get buff, I want to get stronger, well, you know what you need to do. You need to go to the gym. You need to go to the gym and you need to intentionally and progressively lift heavier and heavier things. You will become stronger. But if you want to become spiritually stronger, do you guys know what you need to do? Man, you need to intentionally and progressively wrestle with weightier and weightier questions. You might even have to go through weightier and weightier things in your life to become spiritually stronger. God delights in using the tough things and the tough questions that we are going through to shape us. And that actually is why that the book of Psalms has captivated so many people for so many years. For thousands of years, the book of Psalms has captivated its readers because the writers of the Psalms, that book of songs and hymns and poems, right there in the heart of your Bible, the writers of those Psalms don't know anything with play-along religious faith. They don't know anything about show up on Sunday morning faith, prim and polished and nodding along and singing a couple songs and saying a couple prayers and going right back into life. Like not a single thing that happened on Sunday morning has any bearing whatsoever on the rest of their lives. They don't have categories for that. The writers of the Psalms are emphatically raw. They are real, guys. They are real, not just with God, but with others as well. They are fearless in their willingness to take their tough questions to God. Not just tough questions of the head, tough questions of the heart too. So we are going to dig into a psalm this morning. Maybe you are in a place where you are wrestling with questions. Maybe you know someone who is wrestling with questions. We're going to take those questions seriously because God takes those questions seriously. And life is way too short for you to walk out of here thinking we're calling you just to play along with some dumb religious games. Does that sound good? So we're going to be looking at Psalm chapter 13 together this morning. So as you are turning there, we'll have it on the screen behind me. We'll be working our way through this bit by bit. But as we were getting that set up, I want to give you a little context for this one. There's actually a little preamble to Psalm 13. Many of the Psalms have this. It's just a little note, and it says, before you get into the meat of the actual song, the actual poem that we're going to work through, it says, to the choir master, a psalm of David. So Psalm 13, like many of the Psalms, was written by this guy named David. You've probably heard of him. David the shepherd, David and Goliath, King David. He eventually becomes King David, and David writes many, many, many psalms that get collected into this book. David also had a nickname. Anyone know what David's nickname was? He was referred to being something in Scripture, being a man after. Yeah, I heard several people say he was a man after God's own heart. Remember that, by the way. We'll come back to that a little bit later. But I want you to hear, at least on the front end, a man after God's own heart has absolutely no issue bringing his tough and good questions to God. Now, as you were turning there, Psalm 13, I was turning there myself. One last thing I do want to mention is that we've been in this series throughout the summer in the Psalms. I just want to highlight something. I think the other communicators, Caleb, Tyler, have done such a good job highlighting for us the last couple of weeks. Look, the Psalms are not primarily about giving us information about God. They do that. They certainly do tell us information about God. But the Psalms are so much more about inviting us into full-on life engagement with the God of the universe, the God who made you, the God who loves you, who has a purpose for you. An engagement through prayer and worship with the God of the universe. So it's with that mindset of engagement, we're going to jump in here. We're going to look at the first few verses. This is God's word. How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look on me and answer, Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. And then my enemy will say, I have overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall. We'll pause right there for a moment. I've mentioned up here a few times in the past that I met my lovely wife, Sheila, when we were in college together at Carolina. Go Heels. And we were in college there when I met her. What I've not mentioned, though, is that my wife, Sheila, is actually an English major from Carolina. She's kind of, I think she would describe herself this way, a bit of a word nerd. Maybe you're a word nerd, like grammar. She likes diagramming sentences sometimes for fun. Is there just moment of honesty, is there anyone like that here? Oh, I see some pointing at other people. That's even better. I'll let her know she's not alone. There's a couple other weirdos here. Okay, so anyway, but my wife was an English major at Carolina. And by the way, she graduated like 15 years ago, still fluent. Isn't that cool? That's pretty cool, right? She's still fluent. She Englishes goodly. Now, the reason I mention that, though, she's dying if she's watching this online. The reason I mention that, though, is because you don't need to be a word nerd. You don't need to be someone who diagrams sentences for fun. You don't need to be an English major to see right away there's something significant that stands out to you in this psalm. Right away, 4 times, David says the same thing over and over and over again. How long? How long? He's asking this question. Now, that's a question that's really tough to answer because it's a question about waiting. It's a question about being stuck. It's a question of uncertainty, of weakness because you don't know what's going to happen next. Some of you might be in a season right now where you are sitting with and wrestling with a question just like that. You don't have to raise your hands. Please don't raise your hands. But I want you to sit with, does anyone here feel stuck? Does anyone feel stuck in their job? You feel stuck in your marriage, relationship with your kids, or maybe with your parents? Stuck because you're not sure what you want to do with your life. Stuck because you don't know when God is going to show up and you're just left waiting. And waiting is the worst. You feel stuck and you're not sure what to do next. Now, I want to highlight those questions for you because David does have those same questions. He is unafraid, though, in bringing his questions to God. And that actually is one of the most important initial takeaways for us. That David's really, really hard, really tough questions propel him towards God and not away. David's questions draw him closer to God. And I want you just to think for a moment, what is your knee-jerk reaction when you have questions? Especially questions of faith, questions about how long or what's happening in your life. What is your go-to default reaction? Is it to turn towards God or to turn away towards other things? Distraction, self-medicating, avoiding. See, David is committed. Not just in this psalm, in all the psalms. David is committed. He wants to turn towards the Lord with his questions. He is confident in God's ability to receive and meet him in his place of questioning. Now, David brings that question, how long? But that's not the only question that David brings. If you notice, he continues on. He actually asks a second question. There's a little bit more substance to it. It's not just how long am I stuck here. It's God, what in the world are you doing while I'm stuck here? He says this, will you forget me forever? A few months back, I woke up, normal morning, had breakfast, got my kiddos ready for school, took them on in, came into the office here, opened up my laptop, and my calendar on my laptop had a little notification for me. It's like, oh, you've got a meeting with Adam and Crystal Hoffman, a great couple that go to church here, have a meeting about their community group. You are now 2 hours late for that meeting. Oh, I had totally forgotten them. I had totally spaced. I stood them up. What a jerk. I felt terrible. I texted them right away. I'm so sorry. Just over the top, apologizing. But I'm also a millennial, so I made excuses. There's just such a busy day. And there's probably bad parenting's fault. My parents didn't teach me about punctuality. Typical millennial stuff. But anyway, I apologized. And you want to know what happened? They forgave me. They were gracious. They took me back. We rescheduled. We ended up having a great meeting. It never feels good to be forgotten. But when you're forgotten by an acquaintance, a casual meeting, it's not the end of the world, right? Some of you actually probably don't mind when someone doesn't show up for a meeting. It's like, ooh, I get a little extra time on my calendar this week. That's kind of nice. I'd be okay if they didn't reschedule. But that's not typically a big deal. But it does get more painful to be forgotten based on how well you know that person and how important the situation is. Getting stood up by an acquaintance is annoying. Getting forgotten by someone you were made to trust and be in relationship with, man, that's devastating. That's parent forgetting a kid's birthday. That's spouse forgetting anniversaries. That's a close friend forgetting about you when you are in a season of crisis and need. That leaves scars. And see, that type of forgetting, that's where David is at here in verse 1. He says, how long, Lord, will you forget me forever? And what he's saying is, God, what are you doing? What are you so busy with? You're so focused on other priorities and other commitments that I am completely out of your mind right now. You're not tuned into my cause. You're not tuned into my needs. You're not tuned into me. You have forgotten me. Have you ever felt like God's forgotten you? You ever been in a season of your life where like everything else feels more real to you than God's presence? Look, I want you to hear at 7 Marks Church this Sunday, I want you to hear something. Look, you're not alone. You're not alone. You're not broken or flawed. You're actually in company with a man after God's own heart. See, David isn't just wrestling, though, with how long he's going to wait and has God forgotten about me. In that waiting and in that feeling like he's forgotten, like he's off God's radar, those thoughts actually start to turn a little bit darker. Like, what if God hasn't just forgotten about him? That's kind of a benign negligence that comes from forgetting. You just kind of accidentally forget stuff. You can't make yourself forget stuff. But David ups the ante. In the next verse, he says, how long will you hide your face from me? It's not just that God is passively, forgotten about David anymore. Now it's actually feeling like God is intentionally hiding. Back in 2020, that was a fun year, wasn't it? First few months of 2020, I remember my oldest daughters, they were still little, but they were old enough to just be absolutely bouncing off the walls, stir crazy. It was not, we were just desperate for anything to do in that time. So I decided to teach my daughters hide and seek. I taught my daughters hide and seek. It's a very complicated game. I'm very proud of myself. So I taught my daughters how to play hide and seek, but I realized something right away. I actually realized a couple things right away when I taught my daughters how to play hide and seek. The first one was this: I'm kind of competitive. I'm going to find a really good hiding spot. The second thing I realized, I really wanted a break from my daughters. I really wanted a break from my kids, just for like 5 minutes. So I was going to find a really good hiding spot, and I was going to make them work for it. You're going to play this game the right way. You got to keep looking until you find me. Great plan. What could possibly go wrong? Well, it turns out a lot. It turns out that my daughters were of an age where when I stayed hidden for a little too long, it did not go over well. Like, it messed with them. It unnerved them. They actually were so anxious and scared when they couldn't find me, when Daddy wasn't coming back out. They burst into tears. Father of the Year, by the way, you can nominate me upcoming. Just put another $1 in the counseling jar. Look, my daughters, it turned out, did not like it one bit when I stayed hidden. And when I stayed hidden, it left them sad and lonely, confused, angry. Mommy wasn't too pleased either, actually. So there was a lot of things going wrong. Look, in Psalm 13, David moves from feeling like God has maybe just forgotten about him, passive, benign. What if God's hiding from me? What if God is intentionally turning away from me and doesn't want to be found? Do you ever feel like God's playing hide and seek with you? He's really good at it. Does it ever feel like he's playing hide and seek with you and he has been hiding for way too long? Sometimes long enough to move us to tears if we let it. And that's where David's at. Now, with God seemingly hidden, David is alone. He says what he's left with. He's left with his own heart. He's left with his own thoughts, and neither is very much good to him in this moment. He says, Psalm 13, verse 2, how long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? So in the midst of trials and difficulties and anxiety, David is stuck in his own head, and he is totally exhausted by what he finds there. You guys relate to that at all? Do you ever go down a pathway? You ever have recurring thoughts and they just grind you down and wear you out? You start to cycle over and over and over again on the same thoughts. And no matter how hard you try to move on from the thoughts, maybe it was something a friend said, maybe it was a fight you had with a spouse, maybe it was a bad job performance review or a cutting word from a coworker, whatever it may be. You ever find that those things just sink into you like a hook and you can't move on from it? Again, you're not alone. Actually, counselors have a word for this. The word is perseverate. Perseverate. Speaking of word nerds, that's like 18 million points in Scrabble. Perseverate. Perseverate. All perseverate means, though, is that you are having repetitive, recurring thoughts that pull you in and grind you down over time. And that is where David is at. David has fallen into himself. Without God in sight, without God in his current situation, all he has is his own heart and his own thoughts, and he is sinking down and down and down into himself. Now, here's why I think this is interesting. I think we live in a world today that would actually celebrate this moment in David's life. I think we live in a world today that would say, hey, David, congratulations. You cut the cord. You moved on from that whole God complex. You kind of moved on from that whole needing to trust God, needing to hear from his voice. Now you can really focus on yourself. Now you can look inward. Now you can actually be the God that you need yourself to be. You can attain all you need to attain. That might feel good for a while. But you know who the easiest person on the face of the planet to fool is? Yourself. We are really good at fooling ourselves, aren't we? We are really bad at maintaining healthy perspective on our thoughts, our emotions, our problems in our lives. We have a really bad habit of sinking down into ourselves. There are two reasons a problem is hard to solve. You're either too far away from that problem to see the details, or you are too close to the problem. Guys, sometimes we're the problem. Sometimes our hearts, our minds are the problem, and we can't get out of ourselves. And we need this external voice. We need this voice of perspective, this voice of truth and love that can pull us back from that perseveration, that can pull us back from that sinkhole of spiraling and spiraling and spiraling. We need the voice of God in our lives. And when you have questions and when you're struggling, turning inward on yourself, as tempting as it may be, you know what? It is going to wreck you. It is going to exhaust you. And you see this time and time again. It's not just going to exhaust you, it's going to impact the things around you. Anyone who has gone through a season of significant internal struggle, you've probably started to see it seep out through the cracks into your life. You've probably seen it happen for other people. Well, David sees that happen here, verses 3 and 4. David now turns the lens outward, out of himself. He says, how long will my enemy triumph over me? Look on me and answer, Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. And my enemy will say, I have overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall. In this one short psalm, this is a really short psalm, despite how long I'm talking. This is a really short psalm. David is dealing with his internal world, his head, his heart, his emotions, but he's also dealing with what's out there. His external world, the people, the situations, the enemies around him. And for most of us, if we pray, if you're a prayer kind of person, what's easier to pray about? The stuff that's in here or the stuff that's out there? Typically, it's going to be the stuff that's out here, right? Fix him, fix her, fix my kids, Lord, fix my spouse, fix my job, fix my finances, fix my health, fix. That's not a bad thing, but it's so easy for us to focus on what's out there. But you see, in this psalm, that David is not just praying for his circumstances, and he's not just praying for what's going on in his heart. He's praying for both. Why is he praying for both? Because God cares so much about both. Years back, I made probably one of the hardest decisions in my life, or at least my wife and I made one of the hardest decisions in our life. We made a move back to North Carolina from Colorado. We'd been in Colorado for years, went out there for school, was pastor at a church out there, and it was just such a sweet season for us in our life. But we believed that God was calling us back to North Carolina, calling us back to be near family, to our roots. There was a church that had offered me a job, so I accepted that role. And as sad as we were to leave Colorado, we jumped into this church in Apex, North Carolina, just both feet in. All in. And if you guys get to know me a little bit, some of the staff will laugh at this. I'm not lacking for enthusiasm as a person. I tend to be a little high octane, a little high intensity. And I brought all of that intensity into this new role. I said, God has called us here. I know what we're going to do. We're going to love people where they are. We're going to encourage them to grow in their relationship with Jesus. We are going to reach the triangle with the gospel. We're going to change the world. And I'm all in. So I jumped in this new role. It's a much bigger church, all this complexity and resources. I said yes to everything that came my way. I'm going to teach. I'm going to redesign things. I'm going to serve the staff. I'm going to do everything. And after months, every single thing I touched stunk. It was a disaster. Everything I did, every time I spoke and taught and started, every relationship I tried to form, it was like it was behind a brick wall. It was awful. It was like an anti-Midas touch It's like instead of touching things and they turned to gold, it was like I would touch things and they would turn to raw sewage. It was awful. And I was mad, guys. I was so disappointed. I was mad. I was frustrated. And I didn't want to talk to God about it. God was the last person I want to talk about how I was feeling, because I kind of blamed him. You called me here, and now you're going to leave me high and dry? But I was miserable, and I knew I needed to talk to somebody. So I had two friends. I had two friends that were followers of Jesus that I knew would give me, I think, solid counsel. So the first friend I went to told me this. They said, Joseph, you are in a battle. Right? You are in a battle of cosmic proportions. Look, you are God's man, and he has called you to do gospel ministry here in the Triangle. And of course, the enemy is going to be arrayed against you in battle. You need to put on the full armor of God, and you need to pray, you need to pray, you need to pray that God is going to overcome the darkness, and he's going to push it back with all the light of heaven. He said, that's what you need to do every single day. You need to commit yourself to going to battle. It ain't going to be easy, but it's worth it. All right, kind of fired up. All right, that's good advice. Second person I talked to was a little bit more thoughtful, a little bit more contemplative. Asked me a lot of questions about myself. Well, Joseph, I've heard you talk a lot about these plans you've got. Like, where'd those come from? Were they your plans? Or are they God's plans? I'm talking about building the kingdom. Whose kingdom are you trying to build in this new season? Are you trying to build your kingdom? You're trying to build God's kingdom. Actually, whose glory are you doing this for? Are you doing this in the name of Jesus? Or are you doing this in the name of Joseph? And the second person is asking me all these inner world questions, right? They're asking all about the stuff going on here, not about my circumstances. And then they said this. They said, what if God's thwarting you? Yeah, what if God's cutting you off at the knees? What if, in fact, he's doing this because he actually has something far better for you? What if God is willing to thwart you to heal you? What if through this process and through this season, God is actually trying to surface some of your control freak tendencies, some of your overachiever tendencies, some of your insecurities, and he wants to surface those so he can absolutely tear them down and replace them with faith and hope and love, trusting in his strength, not your own strength. So I heard that. I said, I am never asking that person for advice again. No, they both gave me really good pieces of advice, and I was so conflicted. Well, God, which one is it? Is it a battle that I need to go to war at every single day in prayer? Is it something I need to turn the light inward and I need to really do some soul searching and repenting? Which one is it, God? What's true? And you guys know, they're both true. They're both true. God cares so much about our circumstances. He cares so much about your circumstances. Don't miss that. He does. God also cares so much about the person you are walking through those circumstances. God is in the business of eternal character formation. And prayer is the tool that God uses to reshape all parts of our lives, inside and outside. That's what we see in Psalm 13 today. Let me ask you this. Where might your prayer life be a little out of balance? Whenever you ask people about their prayer life, there's always the answer. And so I don't pray enough. Hey, take a chill pill. That's literally true for every single person in this room. Anyone who has the sense of I don't pray enough, that is true for all of us, okay? But when you pray, where's your focus? Where's the balance? Is it your circumstances? Is it all the things that are happening out here? I get it. That's easier to pray for. But I want to encourage you to take some time this week to ask God and ask people who know you and know the things you care about, what does a balanced, more full prayer life, a prayer life that reflects the heart of Psalm 13, of God caring so much about what's going on inside David's heart, just as much as he's caring about what's going on in David's circumstances. That's my encouragement for you this week. Now, David is bold. He is bold to go to God. I've said that a few times. He's a man after God's own heart. He is bold to go after God with his inner world and his outer world as they're collapsing around him. But there's a reason he's so bold. See, David is so bold because even when he can't see God, he remembers. David remembers what God has done for him and through him over and over and over and over again. And verse 5 starts with such a small little word, but it is a hinge that this entire psalm turns on. This entire psalm moves from despair and hopelessness to hope and life on a dime. And it's on this one little word. And some of you guys, the reason I'm emphasizing this, you need a hinge moment in your life right now. You need a hinge moment in the story you're telling yourself and from the story your circumstances are telling you. You need to turn from despair to hope. This is God's invitation for you right now. Psalm 13, verses 5 and 6. But, I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praises, for he has been good to me. In this verse, David is remembering. He remembers how God has cared for him. He remembers and he trusts God even though he can't see God right now. He knows that God has not left him. I've got 4 girls at home. Pray for me. You can do that in your free time. You can do that in your prayer time this week. But I've got my youngest daughter is 1 year old. She just turned 1 this summer. Sweet little Abigail. There she is. Message is all downhill after that. It doesn't get any better than that. She's stinking adorable. She is in such a sweet season of life. She is in such a good mood most of the time. Most of the time. See, sweet Abigail is in a great mood when the things she cares about are in her sight. When mommy's in the room, she's as happy as a clam. But when mommy leaves, poof, she thinks mommy's gone forever. When daddy's in the room, she's mostly happy. When daddy leaves the room, poof, daddy's gone forever. It's not as big a loss of mommy, but it's still, it's still an L in the lost column. She feels like a toy, stuffed animal gets put away, poof, they're gone forever. And her poor little soul, just like the souls of so many 1-year-olds, is absolutely wrecked with fear and anxiety, because to her, if she can't see it, it no longer exists. But there's hope coming. There's hope coming in her sweet little 1-year-old life, and for all the sweet little 1-year-olds out there, there's something in childhood development called object permanence. It is a huge milestone in a child's life, and object permanence simply means children grow up. They grow up to the point where they realize just because they can't see something doesn't mean it's gone forever. Object permanence brings confidence and trust where there was once so much anxiety. There was so much fear. There was so much loneliness. My friends, Seven Marks Church, you know what we need? We need something better than object permanence. We need God permanence. We need to develop God permanence in our life. God permanence is knowing that God is still there, even when you can't see him. Especially when you can't see him. God permanence is a major developmental milestone for you in your faith. Even though you can't feel God, can't see him, even though it feels like actually he's forgotten you or he's hiding from you, you can remember. You can remember that you have seen him in the past and you have seen him return, and you can remember his unfailing love. You can remember he's been good to you. There's a long history of gratitude and worship and awareness of God's past grace that you've banked for a rainy day just like this, just for a moment like this, and you can cash it in. Because God's unfailing love was there yesterday, and even though you can't see it right now, man, you know it's coming back. David remembers God's unfailing love. He remembers being a shepherd facing down a giant. He remembers being on the run from a tyrant. He remembers being a soldier going into battle. He remembers being a sinner and failing, a murderer and an adulterer, and blowing up his life and blowing up his legacy. And he remembers that God's unfailing love never left him, even though he couldn't see it. Even though he had done everything he could to sabotage it. Never gave up, never stopped pursuing him. So David says, I'm going to cling to you, God. I don't see you. I don't feel you. I'm going to cling to you with everything I have. And that's the invitation that God puts before you today. We talked about questions. We talked about the importance of good questions. Guys, I want this church to always ask good, tough questions. I want this to be a place where we can take people's questions seriously. You know there's something better, though, than good questions? Great faith. There is something better than great questions. There is great faith. It is building our lives around what is true and solid and good. G.K. Chesterton's a British writer. He said this. He said, an open mind is a lot like an open mouth. It was designed to close when it encounters something solid. And I just love that. I love that. Yes, ask good questions. Ask good questions. But ask good questions that lead you to something solid, something worthy of building your life around. And as 7 marks, there is nothing that we believe more than the life, death, ministry of Jesus Christ is worth building your life around. See, Jesus, he is the fulfillment of David. He's the better David. He's the David 2.0. He's not just the shepherd boy, he's the good shepherd. He's not just a man after God's own heart. You know what Jesus is? He's a man with God's own heart. And there is nothing better to build your life around. And Jesus, in being this perfect example of faithfulness, he gives us such a beautiful example of great questions leading to great trust, even when it's tough. In the garden before his crucifixion, Jesus is sweating drops of blood. He's so burdened. He's so anxious. And he goes to the Lord in prayer and says, God, if there's any way to avoid the cross, if there's any way this cup of wrath I'm about to drink can pass from me, please let it be so. But, not my will, but what? Yours be done. Yours be done. Jesus commits himself. He decides in the garden that the Father's way is better. He remembers that the Lord, his love is unfailing, and he knows that God will use even this season of isolation and doubt and questioning to do good. The Father shows his unfailing love to Jesus. There he is on the cross at the gates of hell and death itself. And Jesus is asking questions. God, why have you forsaken me? He's quoting Psalm 22. Why have you forsaken me, God? He's raw, he's real, he goes to the Lord. But in that moment, he says, into your hands I commit my spirit. He trusts that the Father will show his unfailing love. And that's exactly what happens 3 days later. Scriptures tell us that because of his death and because of his resurrection, that Jesus has been crowned with glory. He has been enthroned as King and Redeemer and Judge of the world. And Jesus is the world's Savior. And so speaking of questions, I got one you got to wrestle with. What are you going to build your life around? What are you going to build your life around? Is it the unfailing love of Christ that went to the cross on your behalf and suffered and died and faced real abandonment so you wouldn't have to? Or are you going to put your faith in something else? Is there something else more worthy, more valuable, more true, more solid for you to put your faith in? Ask good questions, but let those questions lead you to a solid place of faith. And that's what Jesus invites you to step into. Even when you can't see God, even when you don't feel his presence, even when you're asking God, how long? How long until you rescue me? Jesus says, listen. You can trust the Father because I trusted the Father. He does not fail us. So follow me in trusting the Father, even when it's dark, even when it's silent, even when you feel abandoned, because I have been right where you are, and you are not alone. You will not be abandoned ever. That is the promise of Jesus. That is the promise of the gospel. That's the invitation to you here today. So what is Psalm 13? What does Psalm 13 have for us right now, this week, as we leave here? Well, it's a few reminders as we end with this. Psalm 13 invites us to turn towards God with our hearts and our heads' toughest questions, not away. I get it. It's tough. The knee-jerk reaction is we're going through something tough. We turn away. We want to medicate. We want to avoid. I understand that. The invitation, though, for some of you here today is to do something you've not done before, is to have an honest conversation with God. It's actually to bring your questions. Ask your good questions and let him meet you in that. To take 15 minutes this week and to start by reading Psalm 13. Let this psalm orient you towards God, and then just write them down. Questions and thoughts and fears, and let God meet you in that place of questioning and show you solid ground to stand on. The second thing that this psalm teaches us is that prayer has the power to change our outer worlds, but also our inner worlds. We need to be committed to praying both sides of our lives. That inner life, the outer life, we need to trust that God has the power not just to save our souls, he absolutely does have that, but he has the power to save and redeem the things our souls care about, our circumstances. Look for places where your prayer life is out of balance and meet the Lord there. Lastly, individuals and as a church community, this is for us. We have got to develop a greater sense of God permanence. Do you know what the world needs? It needs Christians who are unshaken, unbowed, unafraid, not because of our sufficiency, but because of God's, because of his unfailing love. The world needs Christians who believe in the night what they trusted in the light. That's the invitation for you this week, to hold on to God permanence. Our world needs Christians that commit, that choose, that submit to the way of Jesus, because Jesus submitted himself to the cross. And in his moment of total darkness, he still surrendered himself into the Father's loving hands, and he was raised to new life. God's mercies never fail.